your friend of the Sacramento Kings. That is Kayte Christensen joining us here on the Folsom Lake Honda Hotline. Kayte, good morning. How are you?
I'm great, Jason. How are you?
I'm doing well. I know we had the near miss at 8. I'm glad we connected here at 9.
Yeah.
How was your break? Did you get away, do anything fun?
A little bit. It's kind of, I've always been like, especially because we traveled so much prior to the break, it's like coming back to travel is not as, as alluring as it might be sometimes. But yeah, I went up to Tahoe, took the kids sledding and did Disney on Ice. It was a very mom-filled all-star break.
How was the snow good up there in Tahoe?
Oh, yeah. We went up to Sugar Rush.
Nice.
They have a great little place for sledding for the kids. And it was fun. It was nice.
Awesome. Well, I know everybody's looking forward now to this next group of games, this batch. And, do you think you were around the team? You saw them play. I thought I was really impressed with the last win. To get that one in Denver was impressive. But did you get a sense being around them that the break was coming at a good time for them?
Oh, my goodness. I think that everyone needed it. And, we always talk about the physical component of, if they've played 55 games, the All-Star break, there's this, kind of thing. It's like, oh, it's the midway point of the season. It's not. You're 2/3 of the way through the season. And you look at the schedule and the travel and just, how brutal this has been. And the Kings have had the third most, difficult schedule of any team in this league this year. And so I'm like, I felt like De'Aaron about a month ago was, looking a little bit worn down and tired, like the break couldn't get there fast enough. And, it's the mental component of it too, that I think they need a mental break from just the grind of the NBA schedule.
Yeah. And so now they get that. Now we'll see what they do. We played some sound yesterday, or earlier in the show, I should say, from yesterday's first workout. And Mike Brown basically addressed two things that I'd like to ask you about. That he said, doing kind of some self-evaluating now that they've played this many games. They know what they need to do, what they'd like to improve on. And the first thing he brought up on the defensive end was a specific one, but he brought up 3-point defense. When you watch this team, I think there's some reasons why they protect the paint a little bit more. But schematically, what can they do better, I guess, to improve on that 3-point defense?
It's interesting because they've not been a great 3-point defensive team, like by the numbers. You absolutely know that. But defensively, when it comes to protecting the paint, they are a much, much, much improved team this year. And so, it's like how the balance of how do you protect the paint at a high level, but also the 3-point line. Because the league has just changed so much with the 3-point shot. And if you can get downhill and if you can get in the paint and then you can get a team in rotation and kick it around the outside, you're going to get an open shot. So I think the question more is about, it's fundamentally like your closeouts. How are you closing out to 3-point shooters? Are you closing out to where you're, going by them? You're rushing out and you're kind of defending, and then they basically, dribble sidestep into an open 3-point look. Like, I think that's one of the things that Mike Brown wants to focus on is just the way that they close out and make sure that you're closing out hard, but also in a position to recover so that they're not getting that second look with the dribble sidestep 3. So, I'm curious, having a little bit of practice always is good, but you're going into this, the stretch of the season where, hey, you play San Antonio, then you go to LA, and then come back, play Miami the next night. Like, you just immediately go back into it. So I always think it's really hard when you're deep in the season to make massive changes, because I think those changes have to come with practice time, and there's just not a lot of practice time at this point in the season. So we'll see what schematically they're going to do to try and adjust that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it would feel as glaring if they were shooting the 3 better themselves. They just haven't been nearly as consistent as they were a year ago. But I think that Denver game is a really great example of, how they were able to find a way to win despite the one thing that they rely on at a high level. It just wasn't going their way. And, he said it in that soundbite, there was a physicality to the game. And I think that is going to make the biggest difference for them defensively, is if they can bring a level of physicality on a more regular basis.
The one he brought up, Kayte, on the offensive end was one we've seen, and it's an obvious one, I think, is free throws. And it's a little bit of a head scratcher in this sense that there are good free throw shooters on this team, and there are guys that are shooting below their norm. And I don't know if that's, as you as a former player, a million attempts. I don't know how many over your lifetime the premise, your routine, you've shot millions of them. Why a guy like Sabonis is down a little bit, and Fox, and then Monk is in a little bit of a rut. I don't know the answer, but that's an area that has hurt this team in games this year. That area needs to get better.
It needs to get better. I mean, you can't win at a high level, and especially in clutch situations, you put yourself in a bad spot when you're not knocking down free throws. And to me, honestly, there's too many great shooters on this team for their percentage as a whole to be so bad. I haven't looked at it since, before the break, but I think it's like 28, 29, 30. It's pretty bad in terms of rankings in the league. And to me, the biggest thing, it's mental. It's mental. They had a couple games in a row where they really, really struggled, kind of a month or so ago. And I felt like it was an infection that went throughout the team. And so I personally think, yes, it's about getting to the free throw line in practice in those situations. And it's not about I'm going to make 100 free throws. You have to make them when you're running up and down. You have to add that into kind of your free throw repertoire, because it's different during the course of a game. You might go and make 80 out of 100 free throws and you're feeling pretty good about yourself when you're in shooting practice, but then you get in a game and you don't have your legs underneath you. Then you factor in the mental side of it. The game is on the line, that kind of stuff. And I think, to me, the glaring problem has been more of a mental one. And it's how do you get out of that? That is on each and every one of them individually to kind of adjust the mentality.
As we're talking with Kings TV analyst Kayte Christensen here on our Folsom Lake Honda hotline. So those are a couple things Coach addressed. You watch every game, you call every game. Anything, I know there's always things to improve on, but anything else that kind of has your attention in the final 28 that you think needs to be tweaked and ramped up a little bit as they try to make the playoff push?
I mean, that's a good question. I think overall they're doing a good job in terms of offensively, but there's been more situations, to me, I feel like, when there's a little bit more stagnicity, if you will. Is that a word?
We're making it one.
Yeah, in their offense. The thing that makes them great offensively is their willingness to move the ball, constant movement. It's so hard to defend. I don't care how good the team is defensively that you're going up against. But if you're moving the ball, you're switching it from side to side, you're getting those dribble handoff actions. Those are really, really hard to defend throughout the course of a 24-second shot clock. And so, I think that is something that they need to focus on at a higher level, because I felt like there was a drop off, specifically the last month or so. But I've seen things like, that Phoenix game that they lost during that road trip, after the Milwaukee game, when they were up big and they ended up losing. It's because Phoenix went to a small lineup. And then the next time they played Phoenix right before the break, they did an excellent job. So I feel like they've made adjustments and they've learned from things that have happened during the course of the season, things that they struggled with. So I'm really curious, actually, to see how they look against the Clippers, because the two teams, through the first 55 games of the season that they just consistently did not look good against was New Orleans and the Clippers. Mm-hmm. So obviously those teams ahead of them in the standings, you have to close out the season. You have to make those adjustments against teams that you just clearly don't match up well against. So those are the things that I'm hoping to see here in the next week or two as they're going through and getting back into, action coming out of the break, is have those adjustments been made? Have they learned from those previous losses, and how do they respond from that sense? But, I'm a big proponent, Jason. Defensively, I feel like this team is better this year. They're clearly better. They're not great. I'm not saying they're a top 10 defensive team, but if you can be around 15, 17, 18 in that area, that's a jump from last year. And that's going to matter. It's just, the brutal thing to me is like the Western Conference is just absolutely, it's a gauntlet, and there is no easy night. You have to be able to come out and perform at a high level every single night. So you look at the standings right now, record wise, a little bit before the break. And again, like I'm not back into full work mode yet, so I haven't like crunched the numbers or done the things. I'll save for tomorrow. I'm still trying to enjoy the last bit of my break. But record-wise, they're right at around the same that they were a year ago, but they were in third place last year. So that just shows a couple things. The Western Conference continues to get better, but also it's more healthy this year. Not as many teams have struggled with massive injuries that I think impacted last year in a way, and the Kings were very healthy. So to me, it's like, how do you get yourself back in a situation where you're not in a play-in situation? And that should be kind of the goal. You've got to get to about 6. And right now, Dallas is ahead of you. The Kings obviously have played well against Dallas, but New Orleans is, I think, in that 6th spot right now. That's a team that you have to come out and perform better against. So we'll see kind of how it all washes out here by the middle of April, the end of the regular season, to see if they're in a position where they have a good matchup, potentially first round, and if they've made the adjustments that Mike Brown was talking about yesterday at practice, that, a couple small adjustments can really make a difference.
You're talking about health too. And by and large, I think this team has had more injuries than last year. Nothing, extremely debilitating, but like a guy like Sasha, who's a role player, could help, is going to be out for weeks. But one that was brought up yesterday at practice was De'Aaron Fox. And Katie, I know you've heard it. Like some people go, well, what's wrong with Fox? And then there's the night, like the Denver game, where he is the reason they won. The last 10 points of the game, he takes over. But he basically admitted that shoulder is a thing. But you know what, as an athlete, if you go out there, you get evaluated. And so De'Aaron can still show us he's capable of scoring 40 and dominating a game with an injured shoulder, but maybe some nights the shoulder or just the game, it impacts him and he's not as effective. How do you kind of, as a former athlete and now an analyst, kind of understand that role of, look, he's playing, so he's going to get evaluated, but he also is probably not 100%. So, and one of the most important pieces to this team. So it's a really kind of difficult dance for De'Aaron right now.
It is. And you can tell. And for some time now, you've seen in games where he takes a hit and he's rubbing that shoulder. He's trying to stretch it out. It's obviously something that has been troubling him. One of the things I like about De'Aaron is you never hear about it.
Yeah.
He doesn't complain. It's not on the injury report. It's just, this is just the normal wear and tear that players are going to go through the season. And when you look at the type of game he plays, it's such a physical style in terms of how teams are trying to defend him, especially when he gets in the paint, which he does, at a high level. And so those injuries are going to be there. It's not going to go away. He's not going to feel better until a couple months after the season, probably. So the difference is, though, it's the same thing. It's like when he's on the floor, even if he's not scoring, 25, 30, 40, which we know he has the potential to do on any given night, like his presence on the floor still really impacts how teams have to play defensively against the 5 out there. So that opens up things for other people. And I've really appreciated the fact that I feel like Domantas Sabonis has been so much more aggressive offensively when it comes to looking for his own stuff. So, if Domas is able to kind of pick up some of the slack, Kevin, like it has to be by committee. And then Harrison Barnes, to me, he's played really, really well over the last month or so. I mean, everyone has little dips or whatever, but he's playing so much more aggressively. And you look at it, he's like a 40% 3-point shooter. And it's like, how did you only take 4 shots total tonight? Like there was a stretch of the season for a decent stretch where that was going on. And I had a conversation with, kind of the offensive coordinator, Jay Triano. And I asked him, after that stretch where he was, really having put together some good games, I'm like, what's different? And he said, well, it's kind of our approach to it that was different. We look at the fact that on any given night in the starting 5, probably the worst defender of the other team in their starting 5 is probably going to be on Harrison. So we have to take advantage of that because he's a very capable offensive scorer. So we need to be more cognizant of looking for him early to get him going, to, take advantage of those mismatches. And Harrison is a high IQ player, and he absolutely took that, ran with it, and has been, performing at a high level. So I think that it all comes back to De'Aaron and the expectations of him, right? It shouldn't be where he has to score 40 every night. It's great when he does, but that means that a couple other of the starters are not carrying their load.
Yeah.
So to me, for this team to be successful, they need to have a really, even scoring across specifically the starting five, where you want to see them in double figures every single night.
You talked about De'Aaron's expectations. What do you think about team expectations? And I think that's where it's kind of gotten into an area of maybe some frustration for the fans. And the way I've looked at it, Kayte, I'm less concerned about their regular season record in the fact that I just want them to be in that top 6 to avoid the play-in if they can, have their best possible setup. And to me, my expectations are at that next level. It's the playoffs, and are they building enough of these defensive improvements and these little crumbs that they're showing us that give them some staying power to have playoff success? I mean, yeah, I'd love them to be the 1 seed, but if they're 6 and they advance, to me, that is growth as opposed to, yeah, sure, they could be the 1 seed, but if they get out in the first round, I'm not really, that doesn't really impress me that much.
Yeah, to me, it's so much about kind of momentum at the right time of the season. Like, you look back, Miami is a perfect example a year ago. You go play-in team to going deep, deep, deep in the playoffs. Like, every team is capable of that. Just because, and the Lakers are a good example last year as well. In the Western Conference, they were a play-in team. They went deep. Like, they absolutely struggled early in the season. And early in the season where it was like, what were they, like 2-12 or something? I'm trying to remember when they started last year, and it's like the sky is falling and all these things. And they made some adjustments at the trade deadline that really improved their team. And then they were a strong team in the Western Conference in the playoffs. And obviously they have experience and they have players that, you can't mess around with in a 7-game series. They're a problem. And so for me, I want to see that the Kings are peaking at the right time. I feel like they've made improvements defensively. The numbers indicate that they have. And the question is, okay, is everything coming together at the right time? I really think for this team to have success, they need to be more consistent from the 3-point line. That is, to me, a big glaring difference between last year and this year. And I feel like they're trending in the right direction. Kevin Huerter's shooting the ball much better. You look at Keegan. He is such a different player this year. So his 3-point numbers are down, but his overall numbers are up because he now is scoring at every level. He's not a one-dimensional player. And for a player to make that jump from year 1 to year 2 is super, super promising. And it's great. And when you look at the matchups against the Brandon Ingrams, the Paul Georges, those are the games where he has to make the next step as well, where he's able to score at every level and be productive on the defensive end as well. And to me, the challenges that they're putting on him on the defensive end this year has impacted his offensive game in terms of the numbers. So we know that he can go and have a 40-point game. We know that he can score at a high level, but I want to see him be able to score at a high level in a game where he has to defend at a high level as well.
Talking with Kayte Christensen here on our Folsom Lake Honda Hotline. Kayte, I want to ask you about the Spurs tomorrow night. I know you're not fully into that mode yet, but you saw them already this year. And man, Victor Wembanyama, it was just 2 games ago, he had a triple-double with blocks. Yeah. And I saw him on the set of the All-Star game, and he obviously was just towering over like Charles and Kenny. And then when he gets up to Shaq, he's just bigger than him at 7'4". I just don't know what he ultimately is going to become. But right now, watching him grow and develop is just, he's a phenomenon already.
He is, and he's a special player. He's going to be a player in this league that he's going to break all kinds of records. The numbers are going to be insane. He's going to continue to develop in terms of his body physically. He's not always going to be a complete beanpole. I don't ever think he's going to be a Shaq size. You know what I mean? But he obviously has such a great feel for the game. I think the biggest thing with the Spurs, from what I've watched, and I don't watch a ton of them when it's not getting close to when we're playing them, because, they're just a team that's not really, what's the right way to say this? They're not a team that you're like, okay, I've got to keep an eye on them because they're potential playoff matchup, right? But from what I've seen of him this year, the team just his teammates don't necessarily know how to play with him the right way. So the stats and the numbers he's putting up is great, but they're going to figure it out because obviously they have a Hall of Fame coach. Like, he is one of the greatest coaches of all time. And he's done an excellent job, I feel, at developing and teaching. And I remember when they kind of started going into that rebuild mode, I think everyone was like, well, Pop isn't going to want to stick around and develop youth. Like, that's not his MO, right? And he's actually, I think, really dived into that mentality of he has an opportunity to really teach. And, it's a process with these young guys. And so you look at kind of how they play with Wembanyama right now, it's like, okay, like they kind of get it, but they're not even fully there yet. And when that all clicks and it locks in and they have the right pieces around them and all of that, this is going to be a really interesting team to watch over the next 5 years.
Yeah, Kings just got to make sure they get through this one based on what you said. The Clippers coming, the Heat after that. I know you guys have taken care of the bulk of the road portion of the schedule. A lot of games coming up at home, and if they really want to do that damage, they gotta own that home court coming up, and a lot of beam lightings. Let's hope.
Yeah, March is going to be really, really critical because it's all going to be about, obviously we talked about it earlier. Like, are you in that play-in situation or are you in the top 6? And yeah, the bulk of the travel schedule is kind of behind them, but coming out of the break, they still have quite a bit of travel before you hit the month of March. And, you've got to go to the Clippers, you come home for one, then I think you go back to Denver, Minnesota. Like, there's some really, really tough games remaining on the road. And those are the big ones that I think are going to make a difference. But when you look at taking care of home court, March is going to be a really, really, really critical month because you end the season, in April. I believe there's another kind of 3-game road trip kind of right at the end before you come back for one. So it's going to be, it's going to go a long way to be able to say, hey, like, home floor, we have to be better. We have to take advantage of it. We have to use this crowd because this crowd is just by and far, like it gives such an advantage being in that building. And they're smart fans. You know what I mean? Like, they understand that their presence makes a difference. And so they contribute from the sense of like the sound, how loud it is in there. It really, it can be the final nail in the coffin for a team. So I think, yeah, you look at March and it's going to be a really, really critical month.
Kayte, we appreciate you joining us each and every Wednesday. We'll do it again next week. Have a good call tomorrow. We'll see you out at the arena tomorrow night.
All righty.
Thank you very much. That's Kayte Christensen joining us. She got her break. Kings got their break. Now let's hope they can just vault into that final push here in the final 28 games. Really good analysis from Kayte. If you miss anything of any of our interviews, Jim Less earlier in the show, like tomorrow we'll talk to Sam Amick. Anybody you ever, any portions of the show, you can always go back to sactownsports.com. Show ends up on the podcast. You can look it up and watch it via YouTube as well. And go back and read comments that you like as well. All that's available. All you